When we're not using vCenter Server, we're going to log directly into our ESXi host, and that's what I'm going to do here. Just going to double click on my vSphere client, and I've got an ESXi host, phx ESXi02.itdvds.local, that is not being managed by vCenter. So I'm going to need to type in a username and password that is configured on this ESXi host, so I'm not going to be able to use my Windows credentials. So when we installed ESXi on this particular host, we set up a root username and password. So I'm going to go ahead and log in with that account. So first, let's go up here and go to the home screen. So I'm just going to click on home. We don't have many options here to go to when we're logging directly into an ESXi host. We have a lot more when we log into vCenter, as we'll see here in a little bit. We just have inventory, roles, and system logs. System logs are if we're trying to troubleshoot. If I click on roles, we can set up roles that basically will give users different permissions on this ESXi host. If I just right click and click on add, we can see all the different privileges, and basically we're going to create a user, and if we wanted to, assign that user to a specific role. So if we're not using vCenter, then we need to do this for all of our users. And if we have a lot of different ESXi hosts, you can see that would become unmanageable, and that's really why we want to use vCenter. Well, one of the reasons why we want to use vCenter is so that we can have a central place for authentication, and that's Active Directory. So let's go back to the home screen here and go into inventory. Inventory is where we're going to do most of our configuration and spend most of our time when we're just using an ESXi host. So here's our host. Here's any virtual machines that are on this host. Over here we have where we're going to do our configuration, this Getting Started tab. We can just go past it. It's just informational. Let's go to Summary. This is where we're going to get information about our host if we have our host selected. So these tabs are going to change based on what we have selected, a host or a virtual machine. So I've got my host selected. We can see the host is an HP server, ProLiant DL380G5. We can see how many CPUs, the speed of the CPUs, the license. If we scroll over, we can see the current usage of CPU and memory on this host. So right now, not a whole lot of megahertz being used here, not a whole lot of memory being used, about 1,199 megabytes. If we scroll down here a bit, we can see storage. These are our data stores. We're going to be talking about data stores a lot here in a little bit. These are where the files are actually held for our virtual machines. And if we scroll down a bit more, we can see some networking configuration, the different port groups. Again, we'll talk about this in a little bit. Fault tolerance, how that's set up and configured. And if I just scroll over a bit here, we can see some different commands that we can do from this particular window. Down here we have our recent tasks, so we can see the status. For example, power on virtual machine, if it was completed or if there was an error. We can also see who that task was initiated by, which is kind of nice because we can have multiple people logged into this ESXi host doing different things. And if all of a sudden we see a virtual machine power on, well, we can see who initiated that if we have different accounts set up for our different users. If everybody's using the root account, then, well, we're not going to be able to tell who did it because it's always just going to say root. So let's go over to virtual machine. This is where we can see all the different virtual machines, whether or not they're powered on or powered off, the storage that's being used currently, the CPU and memory that's going to be used. So it gives us a nice quick snapshot of all the virtual machines on this host. If we go over to resource allocation, we can see reservations, limits, and shares. And this is a bit more advanced topic that we're going to get into in our vSphere administration training. But very briefly, it basically gives us the ability to prioritize what virtual machine has more priority to what resources, like memory or CPU. So let's go over to performance. Here we get some nice graphs. We can change the chart options if we'd like to basically see the usage on the host or a virtual machine if we have it selected. Configuration, this is where we're going to configure our ESXi host. So health status, processors, memory, storage, if we're adding data stores, networking, if we're configuring networking on the host, storage adapters, network adapters, advanced settings, power management, and we have even more configurations here. This is all about the ESXi host here because we have it selected and we're under configuration. Let's go over to the next tab. Local users and groups. If we need to set up other users to log into this particular ESXi host, we can click add the user information here, and then go over to permissions and set permissions for that particular user. So we basically add the user or group here and specify the role for that particular user or group. And that gives them permissions to do whatever the role specifies. So this was all if we're not using vCenter. Next, we're going to look at what it looks like if we're using vCenter.